There is a book in the Bible that many people skip. It belongs to the Torah, and yet it often seems as though it is not important to know it. Many leaf through it, see pages dense with prescriptions, sacrifices, meticulous rules, and assume it is not for them. And yet it is precisely there that one of the most radical keys is hidden for understanding the relationship between man and the divine. If you read it patiently, without haste, you begin to perceive something that is not merely law, but rhythm, not merely rule, but a desire for order, not merely distance, but attention towards presence. It is the Book of Leviticus. Speaking of books, do not forget to have a look and see whether any of the books I have written might be of use for your own journey. You can find them on Amazon. Leviticus, then, it is not a narrative in the way that Genesis or Exodus are. You will not find great journeys, nor family dramas, nor daring escapes. Here time becomes liturgical. It is like entering a sacred space where every gesture carries weight, every word is measured, every action is symbolic. It is a book that does not seek to entertain, it seeks to form, it seeks to shape a people. And so the first question is not what it tells, but why it exists. Why, after the Khuruj from Egypt, after the desert, after the fire on Sinai, does this book arrive, so precise, so demanding, so apparently distant from our sensibilities? The answer is simple and vertiginous, because God has chosen to dwell in the midst of a people. And when the divine draws near, life changes shape. Leviticus is the book of dangerous proximity, not because God is cruel, but because he is other, entirely other. And man, in order to stand before him, must learn a new grammar, a grammar of the sacred. They should not be considered merely as barbaric gestures, far removed from our sensibilities, but rather understood as a language. The burnt offering, the fellowship offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering. They are different ways of saying something that man cannot say on his own. It is as though matter itself speaks in his place. The animal, the grain, the oil, the wine, everything becomes word. The burnt offering is the most total. The animal is entirely consumed. Nothing remains for man. It is a radical gesture. It says, I offer everything. I hold nothing back. I recognize that everything comes from God and returns to him. It is not so much linked to a specific sin, but to a fundamental attitude. It is abandonment. It is surrender. It is the acknowledgement of a sovereignty greater than oneself. It is the sacrifice of totality. The fellowship offering, by contrast, changes the atmosphere. Here one part is offered to God, but another part is eaten. It is a shared meal, almost a sacred feast. There is not only distance, there is relationship. It is the sacrifice of joy, of gratitude, of restored peace. It says we are in covenant, we can dwell together. It is perhaps the most human, in the most concrete and convivial sense. The sin offering moves into a more precise territory. Here it concerns a fault, often unintentional, which has broken a balance. It is not merely an inner moral matter. It is something that has real effects, that contaminates, that disorders. The sacrifice serves to purify, to restore order. Blood, in this case, plays a central role, not as something macabre, but as the symbol of life that restores life. The guilt offering is even more focused. Here there is a concrete damage, often towards another person or towards something sacred. It is not enough to ask forgiveness. One must restore, compensate, add something. It is the sacrifice of responsibility. It says, not only do I recognize my error, but I seek to rebuild what I have broken. And here a first crack already opens in our modern reading. Today we are used to thinking that spirituality is interior. Leviticus tells you the opposite. The body matters. Gestures matter. Matter matters. You cannot separate what you are from what you do. And as these prescriptions unfold, you realize they are not random. There is a structure. There is an order. There is almost a choreography. The priest enters, offers, sprinkles, burns. He does not improvise. He follows a design. And so you begin to sense something. This book is not only for those who read it, it is for those who live it. It is a script. At a certain point, you understand that the protagonists are not individuals, but the relationship, the bond between God and Israel. And that bond needs to be guarded, protected, purified. But why is all this so rigorous? Why does every ever seem to carry such serious consequences? Why this constant tension between purity and impurity? The answer is not yet complete. You must move a little further. And when you do, you find something that changes the perspective. At the heart of the book, almost like a hidden center, appears the Day of Atonement, the moment when everything gathers. The high priest enters the Holy of Holies. He brings the blood. He brings the sin of the people, and he performs a gesture that is at once terrible and beautiful. 2 goats, one for the Lord, one for Azazel. One is sacrificed, the other is sent into the wilderness, bearing the faults. It is a gesture that seems ancient, archaic, and yet it speaks to something profoundly human, the need to be freed from weight, to transfer evil, to begin again. And here Leviticus ceases to be only norm. It becomes symbolic drama. It becomes sacred theater. But it is not finished, because just when you think you have understood, the text shifts register again. What may be eaten, what may not? What renders impure, what renders pure? The human body, illnesses, discharges, contacts, everything is regulated. And here many truly stop. They think it is obsession, that it is ancient hygiene, that it is superstition. But if you look more closely, you discover something else. Leviticus never separates the physical from the symbolic. Impurity is not merely dirt, it is disorder. It is what breaks a boundary. And God in Leviticus is the guardian of boundaries, between life and death, between sacred and profane, between order and chaos. And so you understand that this book does not speak only of religion. It speaks of reality, of how the world can remain inhabitable. And at this point, almost without realizing it, you find yourself within a broader vision, a vision you had not anticipated at the beginning, because Leviticus is not only sacrifice, not only purity, not only distance. At a certain point, it bursts into a sentence that seems to cross the centuries. Be holy, for I am holy. It is not advice. It is not a vague ideal. It is a command. And at the same time, it is a calling. Holiness here is not an escape from the world. It is a form of life. It is a way of eating, of working, of loving, of judging. And so the book fills with ethical norms. Do not oppress the poor. Do not lie. Do not seek revenge. Love your neighbor as yourself. Yes, precisely here, in the midst of laws that seemed furthest from us, one of the most universal commandments emerges. And this changes everything, because you realize that Leviticus is not a book closed in the past. It is a structure that holds together worship and life. You cannot offer sacrifices and then betray your neighbor. You cannot be pure in ritual and unjust in behavior. And here a tension is born that will run through the whole of the Bible. But something still does not quite resolve, because this demand for holiness is so high, so absolute, that it almost seems impossible. And so you ask yourself, is it truly for man, or is it an unattainable ideal? The answer does not come immediately. The text continues. And as it continues, it introduces another dimension: time, the feasts, the Sabbaths, the sabbatical years, the Jubilee. Time is no longer mere passing. It becomes sacred structure. There are days in which one works and days in which one rests, years in which one sows and years in which the land is left to rest. And then there is the Jubilee, a year in which everything is brought back into balance. Lands return to their original owners. Slaves are set free. Debts are canceled. It is a radical idea, almost utopian, but it is also profoundly concrete, because it says that justice cannot be merely individual. It must be structural. And here Leviticus becomes almost political, not in the modern sense, but in the deepest sense. It speaks of how a society can remain just over time. And as you read, you realize that everything is connected. Sacrifice, purity, ethics, time. They are not separate pieces. They are parts of a single design. And that design has a center, the presence of God in the midst of the people. Everything serves this. Everything converges there. And so you also understand why the book is so precise, because it is not a matter of abstract rules. It is about making a presence possible. And presence, to be real, needs form. But just when you think you have found an equilibrium, Leviticus places you before a choice: obedience or rupture, blessing or curse. The final chapter is almost a threshold. On one side, the promise of a full life, of peace, of fruitfulness. On the other, the risk of dispersion, of loss, of chaos. It is not a threat, it is a consequence. And here the book closes, but not entirely, because what it has opened remains suspended. How can man truly live this calling? How can he sustain such a high holiness? How can he remain in balance between norm and life? Leviticus does not answer fully, and perhaps this is precisely its secret. It is not a point of arrival. It is a preparation. It leads you to a certain point. It forms you. It educates you. It shows you the distance and the desire. And then it leaves you there with an open tension. And if you return to the beginning, if you reread those first pages of sacrifices, you understand that they were not merely prescriptions. They were anticipations, a language awaiting fulfillment. And here another door opens, but we do not cross it yet, because there is still something to see within Leviticus itself, something that concerns the way it is written, because it is not only content, it is also form. The repetitions, the formulas, the rhythms. It is a text that builds by accumulation, like waves returning, like a breath that insists. And this has an effect. It enters into you, not like a story you follow, but like a structure that shapes you. And perhaps this is precisely the point. Leviticus does not wish merely to be understood. It wishes to be interiorized. It wishes to become habit, gesture, rhythm. And here we touch something very contemporary, because even today, in a world that has lost many forms, that often lives in improvisation, the need for order has not disappeared. It has simply become confused. And so this ancient book can become a mirror, not to copy its rules, but to rediscover the question that generated them. How does one live in the presence of God? And this question is by no means outdated. On the contrary, perhaps it is more urgent than ever, because without a presence, everything empties, and without form, presence is not recognized. And so we return to that initial point, a book that many skip, but which, if crossed, changes one's gaze, not because it offers easy answers, but because it compels you to take seriously the relationship between the human and the divine. And as you do, as you allow yourself to be worked upon by these pages, you begin to perceive something you had not foreseen, a nostalgia, not for a ritual past, but for a life more ordered, more full, more true. And this nostalgia is not sterile. It is a calling, but towards what precisely? And what happens when someone truly tries to respond? Here another story opens. and it is not yet finished.